What would an actual miner nerf look like? It's always fun to joke about how Clash Royale should nerf the miner, but aside from nerfing crown tower damage, Clash Royale has never really done much work on the card in the past few years. Despite these nerfs, the miner is still easily one of the best cards in the game. That's why in this video, I want to explore different ways at possibly nerfing the miner without killing the card, and which way I think is the best way to balance a card like the miner. I think that before I even discuss possible nerfs to the miner, I should discuss why exactly the miner is so strong and in need of a nerf. I think the miner is a really well designed card, but it is simply too good for how much it costs. For 3 elixir you're getting a troop that can be placed anywhere in the arena, that has similar health to a bandit and can damage towers and deal similar damage as a knight to other troops. I just think the fact that there is a troop in Clash Royale that can guarantee damage as often as the miner can should not cost 3 elixir or have as much health as it does. It is the miner's ability of being placed anywhere on the arena that makes it so good. This allows the miner to be classed as a very high skill card, since the number of different interactions you can get with a specifically placed miner, such as kiting defensive troops or distracting incoming troops, makes it extremely popular in top ladder, which leads me onto my second point. The miner is only actually really well played in competitive play rather than ladder as a whole. This is because the miner is an extremely high skill card that requires players to use it in the most efficient way possible to really get the most positive elixir trade from it, and the same can be said for defending it. Only top players are able to consistently predict miner placements or activate the king tower using the most obscure methods. It's the reason that its usage rate is so high in top ladder and grand challenges, but remains lower in normal ladder and mid ladder, where lower skilled players are more likely to be playing. It's kinda strange to see how the miner is almost a complete opposite to the wizard, who is really strong in lower ladder but extremely unpopular in top ladder, until recently where the wizard got an evolution. Keeping this in mind, any nerfs we consider to the miner, we have to be careful on the impact it will make in top ladder rather than in lower ladder. Another factor that makes the miner extremely strong is its ability to fit in almost any type of deck. The miner fits amazingly into almost every playstyle: cheap cycle, control, chip, and even beatdown. Its ability to act as a tank, reliable chip method, defensive card, and an offensive pressure card makes it an almost must-have in some decks, a lot of these being cheap cycle and control decks. Knowing this, we are able to look at possible ways Clash Royale could nerf the miner, and speculate the impacts that these changes would have on the miner and the meta as a whole. The most basic nerf possible to give to the miner is yet another crown tower damage nerf, down to 20% from 25%. While this would be the 4th nerf to the miner's crown tower damage, I think that this nerf would either kill the card or not change its usage at all in top ladder by that much. Let me explain. With the nerf applied, a level 15 miner would only deal 56 damage down from 70 damage to crown towers, and that is really bad. At that point, it would probably be better to risk it and spend an extra elixir with a goblin drill to get a chance at more guaranteed damage. With the dagger duchess, a miner would only get around 100 to 150 damage instead of 200 that it currently gets if it's left unattended. Depending on what's strong and what's weak in the meta, I think it would either kill the miner if Supercell went too far, but it may very well have the opposite effect. Top players nowadays aren't too concerned about the lack of damage that the miner deals. While it is a way to get guaranteed chip damage, more skillful use of the miner is to tank for other cards such as wall breakers or even force elixir out of the opponent, or even in the case of the dagger duchess, waste all of her knives so that your push can go in without risk of being destroyed immediately. That's why I think a decrease in crown tower damage would have minimal impacts on how the miner is played in top ladder, as top ladder gameplay is all about which player is able to chip the tower faster or take the entire tower in a single push. You rarely ever see pushes get moderate damage in top ladder, and since top ladder is the only place where the miner really benefits, I feel like this nerf would still do absolutely nothing to its usage rates. The only way I see something like this making it into the game is if Clash Royale is really lazy and had to nerf the miner as a temporary way to deal with it better, because I can guarantee that it would rise to popularity shortly after a nerf like this, as it has done after every crown tower damage nerf it's received. So what if Clash Royale nerfed the speed that the miner burrowed towards the tower? This was initially the idea that inspired me to make this video in the first place, and I can easily see this as a great way to balance the card. An issue with the current day miner is it is super unpredictable due to the speed at which it burrows. This is easily one of the biggest contributing factors to why the miner gets so much damage. You can be caught worrying about defending the opponent's push, and suddenly a full health miner is on your tower and your duchess has no knives. I propose nerfing the burrow speed to slower than the current day miner, but still faster than the goblin drill. It would make predicting the placement of a miner much easier for the opponent, and it would allow the card to be less punishing than it is. But even then, issues still arise. For higher skill gameplay such as grand challenges, this would most likely kill the card. Top players are already so good at predicting the placement of the miner because they play the game so much that they sometimes just know where their opponent is going to place the miner. If the miner takes longer to burrow to where it is placed, top players would get much more value from defending it than before, and for lower ladder players, hardly anything would change. The miner can be placed literally anywhere near the tower. If a less skilled player versus a good miner player, the slow burrow speed literally does nothing. Over time, yes, the miner would become less and less useful. This is the issue with cards like the Miner. The immediate change in the Miner would completely shift the way he's played, but over time, everyone would adapt to it and find different ways to play him in a way that's completely broken. The card is just that versatile, which is why my next suggestion makes way more sense. Since the Miner can be used on defense as well as on offense, what if Clash Royale just gave him a health nerf? I would suggest it to be quite small enough where it gets the same number of shots on the Princess and Dagger Duchess tower, but is less useful on defense. The amount of times I've seen Miner successfully used on defense as a last resort against a Knight or a mini P.E.K.K.A is insane. It shouldn't be that a 3 elixir card gets this much value on offense and defense. The Miner should be prioritized to be used on offense. A nerf to his health would make the Miner less of a defensive card, while maintaining his offensive specialty. I genuinely think that this nerf is one of the best nerfs that Clash Royale can give to the Miner. Not only would it keep the card alive, it would actually make it a more skillful card, as if you want to use it on defense, you would need to place it in a better way. This is also the case for offensive Miners. It would be easier to defend a Miner as it would be less deadly to your defending troops, but I still think that this nerf wouldn't really do much to the Miner, as eventually, players would find a way around this nerf as they have for the past few years. What would make this nerf even better would be a nerf to the Miner's base damage, and keep the Crown Tower damage as it is. This once again comes back to defensive Miners. Since the Crown Tower damage stat would be unchanged, the Miner would still be the same offensive card, but he would deal less damage on defense. I plan to change the interaction so that it can no longer 3-shot a magic archer like it currently can, basically around a 9% damage nerf. I believe that this would be sufficient to balance the Miner. The Miner would become less obvious of an answer to a princess, magic archer or elixir collector, as it would take a full extra shot to kill these. This is one of the nerfs that I think would genuinely translate very well into Clash Royale, as the Miner would still be the dominant offensive card it is, but not as good on defense, while also being slightly worse at countering long-range troops and buildings as well. But this also raises the question as to the impact it would have on usage rates of cards like the Princess and Magic Archer, since a nerf to the Miner in this way would be a direct buff to these cards. But considering that this is one of the only suggested nerfs to the Miner that doesn't likely result in the card either dying or having no effect on its usage, I'd say that it's a really good nerf to the Miner. Another way to nerf the Miner's defensive capabilities but keep it good on offense is by increasing his attack time interval. This nerf would definitely be much harsher than just nerfing his regular damage, as this nerf would also decrease his Crown Tower damage per second. But if you remember from the poor attempts that Clash Royale had to balance the Phoenix, it seemed to work when they eventually just straight up increased its attack time interval and kept most of its stats similar. So why wouldn't it work for the Miner? I mean, to start, the Miner would lose so much of its Crown Tower damage, which would probably just kill the card. Reducing its defensive capabilities would also just make the Miner less favorable than other reliable methods of defending and attacking the tower, such as the Goblin Drill. I think that this nerf would overall just be terrible for the Miner. Not only would it kill the card as an offensive tank, but it would also ruin the Miner's chance at being somewhat a defensive card. This is definitely one of the worst possible nerfs the Miner can receive. An increase in deploy time is also another really good nerf for the Miner. An increased deploy time would mean that you would have more time to react to a Miner, because it doesn't start attacking till around a quarter of a second to half a second later. This extra half second can literally change the game. Not only would it make the Miner less of a way to get guaranteed damage, this increased deploy time would also limit the Miner's defensive capabilities, which I believe is super important to consider as well. But once again, we come back to the question of how does this impact competitive play? I would say that this interaction change would take time to get used to, but eventually, players would find ways to make it work. A change like this is kind of similar to how evolved Firecracker and evolved Archers now die to arrows. It's such a small change that if you don't realize, you can lose the game, but once you realize it, you're now able to hard counter decks that use these cards using arrows. Increasing the deploy time would temporarily make the Miner easier to stop, but once players begin to use the Miner for use cases other than guaranteed chip, the meta will shift again. I hope that makes sense. An extreme nerf to the Miner would be increasing its elixir cost by 1 to 4 elixir. You're probably thinking that this is an outrageous change, since it would for sure kill the card, but I actually think there is some potential in a nerf like this. Sure, 4 elixir would probably destroy the chance at using Miner in cheap cycle decks where it flourishes, but I think that if Miner were more expensive, then people would stop using annoying cheap cycle decks, and instead start integrating Miner into more heavier decks. A major disadvantage with a nerf like this is that combos like Miner Poison or Miner Bats immediately become more expensive, and a greater commitment on offense for something that's meant to be chip damage. I mean, if you spend 8 elixir trying to get chip damage, you're definitely doing something wrong. And also, if the Miner were to be 4 elixir, then the Goblin Drill would outshine it in almost every way. So what would happen if Clash Royale reworked the Miner so that it was 4 elixir but had more health, dealt more damage to Crown Towers and other troops? I would think something similar to a Knight but costing 4 elixir. This would completely change the way Miner is played, and honestly, it would almost be like a new card was introduced into Clash Royale at that point. The 3 elixir cost of the Miner is the reason that the the miner flourishes in cheap cycle decks. Increasing his elixir cost to 4 elixir destroys these decks, regardless of a stats buff on the miner. I feel like the same thing that happened to the monk would happen to the miner when it was nerfed. The card will initially die, but slowly make a comeback into the meta, simply because the card would be changed so drastically that players would have to learn new interactions, and if Supercell does revert the changes or change the card again, it would just result in too much confusion. This already happened with the Witch in 2019, which I made a mention of in my video of the worst balance changes in Clash Royale, where the Witch was reworked 3 times within a month, with each rework completely transforming how the Witch was played. During that period, the Witch saw some of her highest usage and win rates ever, but shortly after some reworks, it also saw the Witch at her lowest point in the game's history. To be honest, a rework to 4 elixir would actually be a complete 50-50 in my opinion. There was one nerf that I was thinking about, but I feel like this nerf would only really be a final resort to balance the card, sort of like an emergency nerf. It would be to decrease the miner's weight. Weight in Clash Royale is a weird concept, but the main interaction change that comes with different weights on troops is the ability to be knocked back by a log or the ability to be tornadoed a certain distance. The heavier a card is, the less likely that a troop is able to be tornadoed or knocked back by the log. If the miner weighed less, he would be easier to knock back with spells like the Snowball or Log, which would allow his attack on the crown tower to be reset easier and distracted with smaller troops like skeletons. This nerf would also completely counter miner poison, as the miner can be easier tornadoed to the king tower. I just feel like this nerf would make gameplay with the miner really awkward, because he already has a low weight, and if Clash Royale were to reduce it even more, he would look like a goblin being tornadoed towards the king tower. The miner is one of the hardest cards to really nerf, as the impacts a nerf on a card like the miner would affect its usage rate in high skill gameplay to a much greater extent than in casual gameplay. And even though I think the current crown tower damage nerfs that Supercell has been giving the card for the past 3 to 4 years is not enough, I highly doubt that the miner will ever be balanced in Clash Royale, but I have hope that Supercell will nerf its defensive capabilities, as it is one of the biggest issues that the card has. I hope you enjoyed this video though, thanks for watching.